Most of Florida became unrecognizable after 1970. Theme parks swallowed Central Florida. Condo towers walled off the beaches. Corporate chains paved over the mom-and-pop motels. But 15 towns looked at the bulldozers and said no. These aren't ghost towns or historical recreations. They're functioning communities where the 1950s never ended. Neon palm trees still buzz over breezeway motels. Seafood shacks serve recipes older than their buildings. Downtown storefronts keep their hand-painted signs and jalousie windows. The whole state split into two Floridas after Disney opened in 1971, the one that modernized and the one that refused. This is the Florida that stayed behind, and it's still serving grouper sandwiches in the same chairs your grandparents sat in. Old Florida didn't vanish. It just went into hiding, and these 15 towns know exactly where it's been this whole time. Cedar Key sits at the end of a 3-mile causeway on Florida's nature coast, and that single road is the only reason it still looks like 1955. When developers came calling during the condo boom, the island's remoteness made mass development expensive enough that the community could actually say no. So they did. The weathered fish houses still balance on stilts over the water. The Island Hotel has been taking guests since 1859, but it's the 1950s to 60s layer that dominates. Vintage motels with original jalousie windows and tin roofs, shell-covered parking lots, wooden storefronts along Dock Street that haven't seen paint in decades. Tony's seafood restaurant still serves the same recipes it opened with over 60 years ago. The boats outnumber the cars. The signs are hand-painted. This isn't a restored fishing village. It's a fishing village that never needed restoring because it never stopped fishing. Mount Dora sits 25 miles from Orlando, close enough to see what Florida became and far enough to avoid it. While Disney World turned its neighbor into a sprawling theme park economy, Mount Dora locked down its 1940s downtown with preservation ordinances and kept the neon signs lit. Over 30 blocks of storefronts from the 1880s through 1950s remain operational, not as museums but as actual businesses run by families who've been there for generations. The Lakeside Inn opened in 1883 and never closed. Brick streets curve past moss-draped oaks along the lakefront. Vintage soda fountains still serve phosphates at original marble counters. The contrast is the whole story. Orlando went all in on the future, while Mount Dora doubled down on its past, and now one looks like everywhere else, while the other looks like nowhere else. The antique shops occupy buildings that have always been antique shops. The diners maintain their original booth configurations. Mount Dora didn't recreate mid-century Florida, it just never left. Apalachicola survived as Old Florida by staying exactly what it always was, a working town. While most coastal communities pivoted to tourism and rebuilt for visitors, this panhandle oyster port kept harvesting. That meant the economy never demanded modernization, so the buildings never got upgraded, and the whole downtown stayed frozen in its 1950s commercial peak. The Gibson Inn has operated since 1907, with its tin roof and wide Gulf Coast porches intact. The sponge docks still process actual catches. Oyster boats line the waterfront where yacht marinas should be. Downtown storefronts keep their original metal awnings and hand-painted window advertisements. Hellas Restaurant and the surrounding Greek businesses serve the same dishes in the same atmospheres they've maintained for 70-plus years. The Forgotten Coast earned its name by getting left off the Miami-Tampa-Orlando development corridor entirely. Geographic isolation preserved what deliberate choice preserves elsewhere. The result is a town that looks like a film location for a 1950s southern coastal drama, except the fishermen aren't actors, and the seafood houses aren't props. Safety Harbor refused to become Clearwater. That's the entire preservation story, watching the neighboring beach city explode with chains and sprawl while fighting to keep every vintage neon sign and mid-century storefront alive. It worked. The Tampa Bay community implemented strict protections when surrounding areas were selling to developers, and now the downtown still reads as a 1940s to 60s spa town where people came to relax before Florida meant theme parks. The Safety Harbor Resort has operated since the 1920s, with its mid-century modern additions untouched. Green Bench Brewing saved a 1920s building by occupying it as is. Original terrazzo floors remain underfoot in businesses that never saw reason to rip them out. The vintage bank buildings still serve as banks. The waterfront park design hasn't been updated since the Eisenhower administration. Local activists won every fight against chain encroachment and mall culture that consumed the rest of suburban Florida in the 70s and 80s. What survived is the real thing, a functioning community that happens to look like a film set because preservation was more valuable than progress. Micanopy doesn't just look old, it looks untouchable. Spanish moss hangs so thick over the brick streets that the canopy blocks out modernity entirely. Florida's second oldest town after St. Augustine put its entire downtown on the National Register and then stopped changing anything. The storefronts span 1880s to 1950s, with zero interruptions from later decades. The Herlong Mansion operates exactly as its architecture demands, period-appropriate, no compromises. Choloca Boulevard appears identical in current photos and images from 1940. The town was used as the location for Doc Hollywood in 1991, specifically because Hollywood needed somewhere that actually looked frozen, not dressed up to look frozen. There are no parking lots, no modern streetlights, no updated anything. Population stays under 1,000 because the community has rejected every annexation and development proposal for decades. This represents interior Old Florida, not the coastal tourism version, but the Old South plantation-era layer mixed with early automobile tourism. O'Brisky General Store maintains the character it opened with over a century ago. Antique shops occupy buildings that predate the entire concept of Florida tourism. Driving in creates an actual time warp sensation because there's nothing visible to anchor you to the present. Anna Maria Island watched Miami Beach go vertical and said absolutely not. While most Florida barrier islands sold their waterfronts to condo developers in the 70s and 80s, this Gulf Coast community implemented building height restrictions, nothing taller than 3 stories, roughly the height of the tallest palm tree. That single decision preserved the entire 1950s to 60s beach vacation aesthetic. Vintage cottages with jalousie windows and tin roofs still dominate instead of resort towers. Mom-and-pop motels from the Eisenhower era still light up their original neon signs every night. The Rod and Reel Pier has been operating since 1947 with the same laid-back atmosphere, no renovations, no corporate buyout, just continuous family ownership serving the same purpose. Bridge Street Pier and City Pier maintain their historic character, while beaches everywhere else bulldozed theirs for parking structures. The waterfront restaurant occupies a 1950s building that looks and feels exactly like a 1950s building should. Families return to the same beach cottages their grandparents rented decades ago because those cottages never got demolished for high-rises. This is the Florida beach vacation as it existed before it became a luxury product. Simple, local, unchanged, and somehow still here. Cassadaga isn't just a town with old buildings. It's an entire belief system that refused to modernize. Founded in 1894 as a spiritualist community, the Victorian-era structures and moss-draped streets exist because the spiritual practices inside them never evolved past the 1920s to 1950s peak. The Cassadaga Hotel from the 20s maintains period furnishings that weren't preserved as antiques. They simply never got replaced. Mediums still conduct readings in homes that look like stage sets because they've always looked that way. The Purple Rose Trading Company operates as a general store would have 70 years ago, shelves stocked with the same aesthetic. This represents the roadside attraction Florida that thrived before Disney. Quirky, eccentric, unapologetically strange. Except Cassadaga never became ironic or self-aware. No chains ever came calling because the entire town operates under spiritualist principles incompatible with corporate development. The result is a cultural time capsule where the preservation isn't architectural, it's philosophical. The buildings stayed vintage because the worldview inside them never left 1940. Tarpon Springs built itself on Greek sponge diving in the early 1900s, and the descendants of those divers refused to let tourism erase what their grandparents created. The docks still hold working sponge boats instead of pleasure yachts. This is a functional waterfront, frozen at its commercial peak. Family restaurants along Dodecanese Boulevard serve in buildings they've occupied for 70-plus years, menus and atmospheres unchanged. The St. Nicholas Greek Orthodox Cathedral from 1943 anchors a Greek commercial district that looks identical to photographs hanging inside those restaurants. Sponge processing facilities still operate with mid-century equipment. Hellas Restaurant maintains the same recipes and interior configuration from its opening. The Epiphany celebration continues traditions established in the 40s and 50s with zero modernization. This isn't ethnic heritage recreated for tourists. It's ethnic heritage that never stopped being daily life. The preservation happened because the community stayed insular enough and proud enough to resist the homogenization that turned most Florida waterfronts into interchangeable marina developments. Tarpon Springs looks like 1950s Greek Florida because it still is 1950s Greek Florida, operating under the same family ownership that built it. Sanibel Island did something radical in 1974. It incorporated specifically to legally protect itself from becoming every other Florida beach. The timing was perfect. Right when the state exploded with development, the island passed ordinances banning chains, capping building heights at the tallest palm tree, and mandating low-density character. What got locked in was pure 1950s to 60s beach culture. Vintage cottages with tin roofs still outnumber resorts. Small motels maintain their breezeway designs and original neon. Periwinkle Way reads like a postcard from the Kennedy administration. Local shops, shell stores that aren't tourist traps because they predate tourism, casual restaurants in buildings that were never meant to be upscale. The Lighthouse Beach area looks identical to photographs from 40 years ago because nothing was allowed to change. This wasn't gradual resistance. It was a single decision that froze an entire island at the exact moment before Florida became unrecognizable. The shell-seekers and nature-focused families still find the quiet vacation experience that vanished everywhere else, preserved not by accident, but by law. Matlacha compressed every ounce of quirky old Florida onto a half-mile street and painted it in colors that would make a flamingo blush. This Pine Island fishing village never got the memo about subdued coastal aesthetics. Buildings glow in shocking pink, turquoise, lime green, and coral like a fever dream of 1950s to 70s tropical optimism. The structures themselves are vintage fish shacks and mom-and-pop buildings, now housing galleries and shops, but keeping their original hand-painted, eccentric character completely intact. Bert's Bar serves in a building that looks exactly like what happens when a fishing village becomes an art colony without gentrifying. The single road creates a concentrated time capsule, every vintage structure visible in one pass, every hand-painted sign and weathered wood exterior announcing that corporate Florida never made it across the bridge. It's Instagram-worthy now, but not because anyone recreated anything. The aesthetic survived because isolation kept developers away, and the community liked looking exactly this weird. The colors aren't retro revival, they're original coats maintained by people who never saw reason to tone it down. Inverness kept its 1920s courthouse square alive, while the rest of Central Florida forgot what downtowns were for. This isn't coastal old Florida. It's interior, small-town Florida from the pre-boom era, the kind of place that built a main street and then never needed to replace it. The commercial buildings surrounding the square maintain original storefronts with metal awnings and plate glass windows installed 70 years ago. The Crown Hotel from the 20s still operates. The Liberty Theater survived as a mid-century entertainment venue instead of becoming a parking lot. Vintage drugstore counters serve the same function they always have. Nobody ripped them out for modernization because modernization never arrived. Chain development stayed confined to the highway corridor, leaving downtown untouched and functioning exactly as small-town Florida functioned in 1950. The result feels like a film noir, establishing shot. Vintage signage, period street furniture, courthouse square benches, where the same conversations happen that happened decades ago. Inverness represents the forgotten Florida between the coasts, the genuine article that never chased tourist dollars and therefore never needed a tourist makeover. Steinhatchee proves fish camp culture isn't dead. It's just hiding on the nature coast where nobody thought to pave over it. Roy's restaurant has served grouper sandwiches in the same building for over 60 years. Atmosphere unchanged, recipes unchanged, clientele unchanged, except for the ages on their fishing licenses. The weathered fish camps still rent simple cabins by the river with boat ramps and cleaning stations, no amenities beyond what a 1950s to 70s family fishing trip required. There are no chains because chains never saw profit in a working fishing village this remote. The Steinhatchee River remains uncommercial. No yacht clubs, no luxury resorts, just the utilitarian waterfront that fishing built and fishing maintains. Vintage motel signs advertise exactly what they advertised 40 years ago. The docks hold working boats, not recreational toys. This is old Florida recreation preserved by economic reality. Scallop season still brings families to experience the same low-key vacation their grandparents took, served by establishments that never closed and never changed because the customer base never demanded anything different. Lake Wales sits in the citrus heart of central Florida, wedged between Orlando's sprawl and Tampa's suburbs. But somehow, it still looks like 1950 showed up and decided to stay. The downtown along Stewart Avenue keeps its vintage storefronts with original tin ceilings and terrazzo floors, not restored, just never replaced. The Grove House and other historic structures maintain period character because the town avoided the strip mall explosion that consumed neighboring Lakeland and Winter Haven. But the real time capsule is Bach Tower Gardens, sitting exactly as it was designed in 1929, when early auto tourism Florida meant Carillon concerts and landscaped hilltops instead of roller coasters. The Mediterranean revival architecture throughout town speaks to the 1920s land boom, while the commercial layer stayed frozen in the post-war era. This represents interior agricultural Florida before theme parks rewrote the entire state's economy around entertainment. The citrus groves that surrounded Lake Wales created a culture that didn't need modernization. It needed preservation of what already worked. The result is a complete snapshot of Central Florida's earlier identity, hiding in plain sight between the destinations that erased theirs. Everglades City exists at the end of the road, literally. Pavement stops and wilderness begins, and that geographic finality is exactly why the town looks identical to 1960. Under 500 people live here, and development froze decades ago because there's nowhere to expand and no economic pressure to rebuild. The Rod and Gun Club opened in an 1850s building, but peaked in the 1920s as a sportsman's lodge, and the interior hasn't changed since. Mounted fish on walls, vintage furniture in the lobby, the whole atmosphere of Florida as a destination for adventure instead of air-conditioned attractions. Stone crab fishermen maintain traditions passed down through generations, keeping the working waterfront authentic, while every other Gulf town converted to tourism. The Oyster House serves in a vintage fish house that was built for function, not atmosphere, which is exactly why the atmosphere works. Downtown along the waterfront preserves old Florida fishing village architecture with zero modern intrusions visible. Everglades City survived as a time capsule because isolation made it irrelevant to developers, and the fishing economy never required renovation. The past isn't preserved here, it's just still happening. Sebring planned its future in the 1920s and then refused every update. The circular downtown designed during Florida's land boom remains the social center it was meant to be. Circle Park, surrounded by vintage storefronts that never saw reason to modernize their facades or gut their interiors. The Kenilworth Lodge opened in 1916 and still welcomes guests into lobbies with original furnishings, the kind of period-appropriate atmosphere that exists because nobody ever redecorated. But Sebring adds a layer most preserved towns lack. The International Raceway opened in 1950, bringing mid-century car culture into a 1920s framework and keeping both eras alive simultaneously. Racing events still draw crowds to a track that hasn't been corporatized or demolished for mixed-use development. Downtown businesses operate in their original configurations. Vintage banks still banking, old storefronts still selling. The planned community vision survived intact, while nearby cities sprawled into indistinguishable strips. What remains is a complete time capsule of two Florida eras at once: the 1920s, optimism that designed the circle, and the 1950s to 60s Americana that added speed to the small-town equation. Old Florida isn't a ghost. It's not a memory you have to squint to see, or a theme park recreation where everything's too clean to be real. It's 15 functioning towns where the past never became the past. It just became Tuesday. These communities didn't freeze by accident. They made choices when the rest of the state was cashing checks from developers. They said no to the high-rises, the chain restaurants, the parking garages that would have paid for a generation's retirement. They kept the neon signs buzzing and the seafood shacks serving and the downtowns operating exactly as downtowns operated when downtowns still mattered. They're not museums. The motels still rent rooms. The restaurants still serve grouper. The shops still sell to locals who never stopped shopping there. What makes these places rare isn't that they're old, it's that they're alive. The Florida in the postcards your grandparents mailed still exists, maintained by people who decided paradise was worth more than progress. And it's all still there, hiding between the theme parks and the condo towers, waiting for anyone willing to take the back roads and find the Florida that refused to leave.